to call this meeting to order. Downtown Masterplan Workshop. Welcome. Glad to see everyone. I am COVID-free because I've been through it, but if you're really uncomfortable with me not wearing a mask, let me know. I won't put it on for you. No, I won't put it on for you. I'm talking to these people. I believe we're all here. So we'll move on. Do we need a roll call? No. Okay, Ashley, you ready? Where'd Ashley go? Hi there. You ready with your stuff? Okay, we're going to begin.
Thank you for coming. I appreciate the attendance and interest in what we're doing. I'm Jim Walters with Joseph and Joseph Rivera, who have worked for since the first of the year on the master planning, and it's great to see familiar faces out there again as we begin the implementation phase of a lot of those ideas. It's a very exciting time, and I appreciate your interest and hopefully participation in accomplishing a lot of what's in that plan. So this is a beginning of that, and then what we're trying to do is to look at some things that might be implementation tools. I would like to thank Chris White for his use of his facilities here and his support. And we have a lunch that we're going to do. It's going to be bluegrass and buttercream, bringing that in at some point. Just to give you an idea about our agenda for today, we will have our presentation, which will last, and with some dialogue, obviously will last an hour or so. At that point, Chris is going to open up the whole plant operation in a apartment upstairs and the work that they're doing to renovate this building next door, and let you all kind of take a quick tour and see some of his handiwork there. And then we will come back and have a lunch. So that's kind of the plan. I'm really proud to have be able to introduce Louis today because you know he's got a lot of experience in downtown development issues, and we have in Louisville we have most of my experience, and we've done a lot of things similar to what we're kind of putting out in front of you guys to try to cause things to happen. And as I mentioned, as a big part of our master plan idea, the progress and success of it is dependent upon the synergy of many different things happening. You can't just pick one thing and say we're going to fix up sidewalks, streets, and say that's going to really turn things around. We want to get ways to get more commerce. It's very important to get more people living downtown, and we need to do some public infrastructure projects to make it more livable. So those things all work together, but we have to kind of pick them apart piece by piece to know how we're going to finance them. So we're talking today about incentives to get private development to move on some of these issues. Louis, and when we discussed this with him, and Cash Porter had approached him and talked about this, and he volunteered his time. He's here as a volunteer to share his experience, which is considerable. He's one of our most well-respected bankers. He's president of Independence Bank, Louisville, and that bank has 24 locations and operates in 13 cities. Kentucky has assets of about $2.1 billion. It's fast growing, fairly new. Over the past 32 years, he's served in many management and financial leadership roles in the commercial banking industry and has financed many Louisville, famous Louisville landmarks and institutions, and has expertise in traditional lending as well as projects for government, healthcare, higher education, and not-for-profits. He currently serves on the board of directors for a number of community foundations and organizations in Louisville, and his long-term involvement with the Louisville Downtown Partnership, Greater Louisville, Inc., including 15-year-long leadership role in forming and managing the downtown housing fund. And his experience in funding and operating revolving loan funds as a stimulus to private development is what we want him to talk to us about here at Danville. So I appreciate your coming, and at this point, I'm back over to you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Jim. I'm going to take off this mask. It's so much fun in this COVID environment. So, I love Danville. I spent a lot of time in Danville as a child. My dad is a center grad. And we would come up here for probably 10 years straight when I was a young man coming to homecoming. So I spent a lot of time as a young man here, and then when I was at the University of Kentucky, I had several friends that attended Center College, so we'd go back and forth over the years. I'm very happy to be here with a lot of other civic and public leaders. You know, people don't say thank you enough to you because civic leadership and being an elected official, it's spending a lot of your own time, a lot of volunteer time. The pay's not worth it. I was a mayor of a small city, so I understand the dedication that you have to have in order to serve in this role. And it doesn't matter whether you're red or blue in your belief and your politics, because those politics don't matter when it comes to serving a city like this. We're all about solutions, all about solutions. And so I'm happy to be here just to share with you some information, some of the things I've done over my career. So I hope to have this as an interactive talk. I would like all of you all to ask questions as we go along. Cash and Jim have asked me just to sort of do a data dump on the different things I've done in my career and talk about some different incentives, programs, loan programs, what I've seen different cities do to make things work. So before I go into that, a little bit more background on myself. I'm proud to be president of Independence Bank in Louisville. Community Trust Bank is the second largest community bank in the state. We're the fifth largest. And community banks are what are going to help communities like this move forward. So I would ask that you look to your bankers and their leadership, because they know a lot of the movers and shakers in the community, and they can help as you move forward. And it's going to take everybody together. That's the key thing. If you can take away anything today, it's going to take everyone working together to make this successful. So in my career, before I joined Independence Bank, I was with J.P. Morgan for 31 years. And I carved out a career in government, nonprofit, healthcare, and higher ed finance. Carved out a career in economic development finance. In the last 6 or 7 years of my career at J.P. Morgan, I managed a government finance group for 11 states. I had an office in Louisville and an office in Chicago, lived on an airplane. My division had $4 billion in loans in it, $11 billion in deposits, and some of my favorite clients were cities like the city of Detroit, the city of Chicago, Chicago public school system that went bankrupt. So I've had a lot of fun dealing with very challenging issues and a lot of fun dealing with great community projects. And I want to, before we get started about talking about different incentive programs and talk about what you're going to do here in Danville, I want to read you something. How many of you are familiar with Louisville? How many have visited Louisville over the past 25 years? Okay, so you're pretty familiar with Louisville. You know where we were, how far we've come. So I was honored to the Hall of Fame for the 40 under 40 in Louisville last October, and I gave a speech to the incoming class of the 40 under 40, and I was asked to put it as an op-ed to Business First, so I want to read this to you, and I want you to think about your community today, where you were. As I read these words, maybe you can see your community where it is and where it can be. Imagine Louisville with no Marriott Hotel or Omni Hotel, but instead 6 blocks of adult shops. Imagine Waterfront Park as a scrapyard with twisted metal, with a large section of industrial storage tanks, and the Big Four walking bridge, a rusting shell. Luxury Tower, Waterfront Park Place was not even a dream. Museum District is filled with empty storefronts. There is no Louisville Slugger Museum and Factory, no Fraser History Museum, no Muhammad Ali Center, no Muhammad Ali Center, and no 21C Museum Hotel. The Downtown Convention Center is a dilapidated one-block building. The beautiful Aegon Plaza is a dirty, dingy drugstore and a nasty parking lot. 4th Street Live is an empty shopping center. Whiskey Row is a decaying carcass of buildings. There is no African American Heritage Center. Lulu does not exist, but instead, most of the buildings are filled with homeless people. There is no East End Bridge or northbound I-65 bridge. There is no downtown arena, no U of L, no Cardinal Stadium, no Louisville Slugger Field, and no Blue City Soccer Stadium, and no Botanical Garden. We do not have merged government. We are not known for great food and restaurants, and there is no urban tourism. Well, friends, that was us. That was Louisville in 1994, 25 years ago. We've come a long way in 25 years. We've built a great place to live. This was not done alone. It was not done by one politician, one business leader, not one civic leader, or one person with a vision. It took a lot of selfless people to build coalitions and overcome obstacles. And there were even more detractors that said no. We do not want to change. Yet we persevered and turned no into yes. Today we face new challenges, a struggling public school system, public budget deficits, a state unfunded pension system, unskilled workforce, rapid pace of change. Our hometown companies are being purchased by out-of-town organizations. Plus, there is the age-old problem of educational, social, geographic, and racial division. Who will take up the challenge? Who will take the risk? Who will make this a great community? Who will build the next coalition of change agents? Will it be you? So as we start today, I ask the question, will it be you? Okay? So, the one thing that I can say about having success is it's going to take a lot of people coming together from different business interests, different political interests. No will be the common word. We don't want to change. We don't want progress. We'll have plenty of detractors, but it's going to take everybody in this room, plus more people coming together with a vision and building those coalitions to make it happen. It can't be done by one person. It can't be done by one government. It's going to take the city. It's going to take the county coming together. It's going to take the hospital. It's going to take the university. It's going to take business leaders. It's going to take the banks. It's going to take everybody coming together and making it happen. That will be the largest challenge. Putting together buildings, putting together funds, seeing great economic development projects, those will all grow upon themselves. The hardest part is getting everybody together to move in one direction. Once you get the people together, the projects happen on their own. It's getting the people together. So, that's the first thing we'll need to do. Danville's in a pretty good position when I think about communities across the state. I look at, you've got the hospital here. You're blessed to have a hospital in this community. Now, the hospital industry is having tremendous challenges. I'm sure even McDowell has its own challenges here. It's considered a rural hospital, and a lot of the rural hospitals are being gobbled up and becoming satellites of bigger hospitals, or the rural hospitals are going to close. But you've got a good hospital here. So the hospital needs to support what you're doing. You need to support the hospital and its mission. And because you have a hospital here, the city of Danville is in a good economic position because it will be a center for people to come to. All right? You've also got Center College. great, great college. It's got a great endowment. They've got a great mission. College is in good financial shape. It will also be a hub that attract people to this community. So you've got two great assets that you need to figure out how to support their mission and build upon those two assets. Use the assets that you have to your advantage. You know, you've got great challenges for those two industries too. How many of you all are familiar with the upcoming education cliff? How many of you heard of this? It's going to happen in 4 years. In 4 years, the amount of individuals available to attend college will drop by 15% nationwide. So a lot of small colleges and universities across the country are going to be extremely economically challenged. Be glad you have Center College here. They are a great college, they've got a great endowment, and they should be able to weather the storm. According to educational periodicals, it is predicted, and we all know how predictions go, we're going to see 1,000 colleges and universities close in the next decade because of this economic cliff. Now add on COVID and the changing landscape of doing online education, it's a big issue that they're going to have to face. And in my career, predictions, you know how predictions are, 1,000 universities, I don't believe that, but it will be a bunch. It could be a great advantage for somebody like Center. So think about how you can support Center as they look at their mission going forward, and what is important to them from an economic development perspective to build this community. You've got the same problem with healthcare. So think about what's important to them and how you can help them in building out their economic development projects. You all doing this project here is great. This is exactly what needs to be done. There are other small cities doing the same thing across the country, across the state, I'm sorry. Frankfurt's looking at something right now. They're doing some work. Paducah's doing some work. Owensboro did a great master plan. If you haven't been to Owensboro, you need to go down there and see it, see what they've done. And they're doing more things in Owensboro right now. Once you have success, you get more success. So there's other cities right now in the state thinking about the same things that you are. You got to think about how you're going to fit in and what is going to be the thing that attracts people to your community. What do you have? What are your assets? What's going to make you different to attract business and people to move here? Another item that I'd like you all to think about, and if you haven't read this book, there's a book by the gentleman by the name of Bruce Katz. It's called The Metropolitan Revolution. Are you familiar with it? Are you familiar with it, Jim? So it's about 10 years old. And we're seeing it happen today. Bruce Katz predicted about 10 years ago that there was going to be a mass migration that's going to take place over the next 50 years from rural America to urban areas. Okay? And we're seeing it happen. There's 16 major population centers in the country. Kentucky's not in any of those. So we're going to see more populations move to those urban areas. In those urban areas, the sprawl will go out to neighboring states and neighboring cities. Those population areas are where you're going to see a lot of business locate because it's got the education base, the talent base, the transportation base, the communication base. And in order to stay relevant, we as a state and we as a community are going to figure out how we solve that problem to get people to come to Kentucky. The Metropolitan Revolution further states that, and this is so true, and you know this now, national government and state government are not your answer. They cannot take care of your problems, right? In the Metropolitan Revolution, local government is the answer. Local government will solve the solutions. There's no money at the state level. There's no money at the national level. It's all going to fall back on all of us in this room to solve the problems for our community. And so we're going to have to look at how we can use the resources that we have and what type of tax incentives that we can use and what types of things, what types of tools can we use or ask for from the state. There was a big push a little while ago, about 4 to 6 years ago, for a local option sales tax. I think it was called LIFT, okay? It would have made a tremendous difference in our communities. You all know the problems that we have in revenue, and we are completely constrained by Frankfurt. I have been on numerous economic development trips with the City of Louisville, the Chamber of Commerce. We call these glide trips. We would go to different cities across the United States, and we would study what the different cities do for economic development. And every city that we would go to had a local option sales tax. Every city. I'll never forget, we went to Denver. So we went to Denver, and Denver's got how many sports teams? I think they have all 4 major sports. Hockey, basketball, baseball, and football. Yeah, I cannot forget the Broncos. So, John Elway. So anyway, so they have all major sports. But guess what? Do you know what's attended more than their sports? Their arts programs. They have more attendance at their arts programs than all of their sports combined. And what they did in that area is they did a 7-county local option sales tax, and Denver was the hub, and they built spokes from the hub to every one of the smaller cities, just like Lexington would be the hub, and going to Paris, and Georgetown, and Danville, and the other communities around it, and uniting them all together. They did a 1-cent local option sales tax, and they were able to build a metro line, a rail system. They were able to rebuild all their schools, rebuild their arts center. They were able to build bike paths, connecting all the different communities. I don't know if you've been to Denver, but Denver has 300 days of sunshine a year. And it is the healthiest community in America because everybody is an outdoors person. They bike, they hike, they ski, they whitewater raft, and that's what the community wanted. And with the local option sales tax, 1 cent, they completely transformed the entire region. So as you think about what you need to do for your city, also think about what you need to do for the region. Think about the importance of going back to Frankfurt and saying, we need help. We need the ability to govern ourselves and pass taxes that our people want, that our citizens want to improve our community. Now, I hate taxes. I pay a lot of taxes. I hate it. But sometimes taxes are good when they're for a specific purpose. And the local option sales tax is for a specific purpose. So I encourage you to look at that and get with your legislators again. And if we can get something done as a state to help communities like Danville, Shelbyville, Paducah, and Lexington, and Louisville, find the resources that are necessary to improve our communities, that is one of the best ways we can do it. Absolutely one of the best ways. And I also ask you, if you're interested in the local option sales tax, just call up those communities. Talk to the elected officials in those communities, and you will get nothing but glowing remarks. Most of the local option sales taxes were done over 25 years ago when they started. They passed by a 51-49% margin, okay? Half the community hated it, but they said, we'll try it. When it comes up for referendum 20 years later, it passes by a 70 to 80% margin. Okay? It's proven. It's a proven method that the community loves. So all of us that hate taxes like me, because I was against it at first until I really studied it, you'll find it's one of the best tools that we have. But collectively, we have a state that got to look at a tool like that to make it work. So, and that's a hard one to do, because we have to ask our state legislators to give us the right to vote as a community to pass a tax upon ourselves. We don't have the right to vote. That's what we were trying to get done in Frankfurt, was having the right to vote. Does that seem fair in the democracy of America? We don't even have the right to vote. So that may be one of the greatest tools that we can use for economic development of our communities. Now, let's talk about some tools that we have actually done in Louisville, because we don't have the ability to do a local option sales tax, right? So we've said, what tools can we use to help ourselves? This is the kind of things that you have to think about. So one of the things that we did early on is we did tax abatements for development. And I'm going to show you, I've got a graph here that we're going to talk about in a little bit when we talk about the downtown housing fund and how that worked, and how using the tax abatement for property tax also worked. Are you all familiar with tax abatements? Got some heads going like this, some like this. So real quick, a tax abatement would be freezing the tax on a piece of property and its undeveloped value, and freezing it for a period of time, 5 or 10 years, until that property is a valuable and viable asset in the community. In other words, you got a piece of property that's worth $100,000. Developer comes in, develops it, wants housing in it. Well, as soon as he develops it and puts in $1 million into that property, we now tax it at $1 million. And so it just kills the cash flows on these properties. Kills the cash flows, and it takes a while for the property to be occupied. So what we did in a lot of our projects in downtown Louisville, when it came to housing or business development, we just did tax abatement. We just said, we're going to freeze the tax for a period of 5 or 10 years, or 5 or 7 years, and allow the property to become valuable, occupied, and then start charging taxes. And this graph that I'm going to show you will be eye-opening on what you can do. Okay? So I'd highly advise using tax abatements on certain properties as a tool. All right? All it basically means is you're going to defer tax until a later date, and you're going to really reap the benefits. The other thing we have in Louisville that has been very successful is we formed the Downtown Development District. We identified an area that we were going to focus upon, and then we focused all our resources there. Sure.
Sometimes they wondered about, was there a Genesis project saying he did this first to kind of get the rest of the roll, or how did that?
So from a downtown development perspective,
He will.
so in Louisville, if I recall correctly, so I started my career in '86, and there was a project called Vision 2020 that was done in 1980, or Vision 2000, it was done in 1980. So looking out at the city going out forward 20 years. And I didn't get involved until probably about 1994. I was a volunteer in the community doing a lot of other stuff, but I really didn't get into the economic development work until 14 years in. So I think it all started like what you're doing here. Who we want to be, what do we want to be? And then I would say a couple of the big catalyst projects that people started to take notice of. The first one was probably the baseball stadium downtown. So, Waterfront Park. Yep, okay, thank you, Jim. First one was Waterfront Park. Waterfront Park was scrap yards, industrial area, and it was decided to start buying the land around Waterfront Park. And that took 20 years, 25 years to accumulate all that land. And I would say the park really didn't start developing until 90s. That'd be about right?
Well, yeah, it was really right at 90.
Yeah, right at 90 when we started to see green space. But it started probably about 5 or 6 years earlier accumulating the land. Okay, so Waterfront Park was the first, and then the baseball stadium was maybe the next big catalyst.
That was quite a bit later. I mean, but you're right, it was, one thing leads to another.
That was 2000, 2002. Yeah.
The sports stadium was,
1995. Yeah. So
we had the arts center too,
that was
85.
yeah, 85. Yeah. So we had the art center come in downtown.
This is a long period of time.
This is a long period of time. Yeah, this Louisville. I mean, growing up as a kid, it was all porno shops. You know, it was all porno shops.
You heard that.
We were little kids. This is a side story. So we were little kids, and there used to be a restaurant downtown called Kingfish, which is where the Muhammad Ali Center is now. And we used to go there on Sundays. Dad would take us there on Sundays. And I still remember as a 6-year-old getting a quarter out and putting it on the railroad track. We used to run the Kingfish to smash the quarter. But the other thing I would always remember is, as we went downtown, we had to get off on Jefferson Street, and it was just all porn shops. Just everything. I mean, everywhere. And here's the other crazy thing about the porn shops. I remember as we were trying to change the city and change the image of the city, the State Convention and Visitors Bureau is appointed by the governor. And a lot of the people that sat on the Convention and Visitors Bureau were from out in rural Kentucky. And in Louisville, we always would have the farm machinery show and big farm conventions. And the Visitors Bureau did not want to get rid of the porn shops because parts from rural Kentucky would come there and enjoy those establishments. So we couldn't eliminate the porn shops. I don't know what happened, but in the summer of about 1993, 2 entire blocks burned down, about 6 months apart. So I don't know what happened. Pardon? Eddie. All right, so let's get back on track. So we formed the downtown development district. So there was something called the Louisville Central area, which was a bunch of volunteers, all business people that were together. And then Mayor Abramson came in and he hired some staff, and he said, we need to have a more focused effort. So we're going to form the Downtown Development Corporation. We're going to draw lines around this area, and we're going to focus all of our attention here. We're not going to dilute our attention. We're not going to dilute our resources. We're going to focus it all right here in the center of town. Because you know what? Your downtown is the window to the world. That is how the rest of the world sees you. Mr. Laster and I were talking a minute ago, and he was talking about how when people come into Danville and they're thinking about putting a business here, an industry, they don't go to the Lowe's, they don't go to the suburbs, they want to see what's downtown. What does your downtown look like? It's like that all over the country. And so if you want to be a viable entity, this is how the rest of the world will view you. You know, and there's some communities that have just unbelievable challenges. Unbelievable challenges. Be glad you're not one of them. Take, for example, Detroit. Detroit never really recovered from the riots. It never did. I spent a lot of time in Detroit over the past 10 years. There's been a resurgence in downtown Detroit due to a few big companies there making lots of investments in the downtown area. But I want you to imagine a donut, okay? I want you to imagine the middle of the donut is downtown Detroit, right? All the dough around it, that's an empty circle around downtown Detroit. And then outside of the donut, that's where everybody lives. There was huge flight from downtown Detroit and for miles outside of the city center. And when I would talk to my colleagues from Detroit, they never said they were from Detroit. They would say, I'm from Dearborn. I'm from one of the small communities around Detroit, because they didn't want to be affiliated with Detroit. That is a big problem. It's a big problem because it didn't address the racial issues that they had. It's a big problem we have in this country today. We're going to have to overcome it. You've got to have better racial harmony. You've got to be willing to face those problems, and if you want to attract companies to come here, that's going to be one of the first issues they ask you, right? So you don't have that donut problem in Danville, but we all have the other problem of racial equity. So you got to also, as you're thinking about who are we as a community, who are we as focusing our efforts, you got to make sure that you're addressing all those issues as a policy too. Now, let's talk about downtown development and what we did in putting together the core of downtown Louisville. So we started doing some of these projects. We were talking about Waterfront Park, the baseball stadium. We Belknap building. That was the Belknap building that was dilapidated, going to be torn down. We have a great historic preservation group in Louisville that says, instead of tearing down these great assets, how can we repurpose them? It's very expensive to do. but it also maintains the character of your community. You as a community need to think about that. When you think about Charlotte, I don't know, how many of y'all been to Charlotte, North Carolina? Okay? Charlotte, North Carolina benefited from Wachovia Bank and Bank of America being across the street from each other. And they both were fierce competitors. As a matter of fact, didn't even like each other. I mean, if a Wachovia banker was walking down the street as same side of the street as a Bank of America banker, they would cross the street. They would not walk on the same side of the street with each other. So Charlotte, North Carolina benefited from the fierce rivalry between the two organizations. And those two organizations basically built two halves of Charlotte. But in that process, if you go to Charlotte, there's not a lot of historic buildings there. What they did is they tore down most of what they had as historic property and built all new. So some of that's nice, some of it's not. You got to think about what you want as a community. Each community has its own separate identity. Use the assets that you have and figure out how you want to do it. All right? Look at your master plan. Your master plan is going to be your blueprint on how you're going to develop your community. Downtown Louisville, after we built our first things, we soon learned that in order to be successful, you really need to have people living downtown. Okay? So we had a population, Jim, help me, we had a population in downtown Louisville. I thought it was a little higher than that. I thought it was 7,500, but 6,500 living in the jail. Yeah. So our downtown Louisville had very small population of people living in it. The most people living in downtown Louisville were homeless people and the jail population. Yet we had 78,000 people coming to work every day in downtown Louisville. 78,000 people there during the day and 1,300 at night. Okay? We had no real viable housing stock. Our housing stock was for low income. Okay? Government supported, low income, jail, homeless. So we decided that we needed to have market rate housing. We needed to get people to live downtown with disposable income that could support the local economy, that could go to the restaurants, that could go to the shops, have the disposable income out of their pocket, they could spend that money. So the only way to do that was to get people living down there. Well, developers saw great stock, great buildings, okay? They saw a great opportunity to do development and put housing downtown, but it cost a lot of money. Okay? And the developers were only willing to put in a little bit of equity. And the banks didn't want to loan any money at all. Okay? The banks did not want to loan money because they thought for sure if the project would not work, and if the banks loaned any money, it would be the bank would say, we'll put in 40 or 50%, and you developer, you need to put in 60 or 50%. Okay? So the banks were not willing to do anything. The developer said, well, that gap is too far. We can't make this work. But we all knew we had a problem. We all knew that we had to solve it. So, was it David Armstrong at the time? I think it was. David Armstrong, our mayor, formed the Downtown Housing Fund. And he got, was it Jerry or David? Start with Jerry and then, yeah. There was a transition. Thank God we had two good mayors, both Jerry Abrams and David Armstrong. Well, they were bitter political rivalries, both from the same party. They were both fighting for the same position all their lives. They carried on with each other's policies because they were all good policies, which is interesting, right? So David Armstrong did a tremendous amount for our community, and so did Jerry Abrams. So we got the idea of forming the Downtown Housing Fund. And the Downtown Housing Fund, the purpose was to fill the gap between what the banks would loan and what the developers were willing to put in their own equity. So it was gap financing. The gap financing was put in place it was actually seen as equity by the banks. And here's the magic of how we made this happen. So we identified several projects that needed to be refurbished. We then went out to businesses, places like Papa John's, Humana, Norton Healthcare, Brown Forman, GE, Ford, and we went out to banks. And there were a lot of local banks then. There was Liberty and Citizens Fidelity and First National Bank and a lot of, they may have all been purchased by that time. It may have been Bank One, PNC, National City. But anyway, they were still a lot of local control, local options, a lot of local ability to do things. So we decided we needed to raise about $4 million in order to do this. And so we asked all of these companies to donate basically $100,000 apiece. And we're going to put it into a fund, and we had private individuals donate, we had foundations donate, and the key to this $4 million, the city of Louisville said, we'll put up $2 million if the community will match it. All right? So the city of Louisville put up $2 million. We then formed a group of bankers to get together to figure out how to loan this money. And we determined that since all the banks were in the fund, we were all in this together. The corporations all said, we don't know anything about lending, so banks, you manage our money, you manage this process. We trust you and your business. You trust us to run a hospital, we trust you to run a bank, you run this fund, right? So then we also, what was interesting, all the bankers around the table at the time, one of those banks was usually lending money to that developer to do the project. And all the bankers knew that developer, all right? And so whatever bank was the managing the developer and putting up the money in a first position for the loan, they couldn't vote on the loan that we were going to do as a housing fund. They had to abstain. But that banker would volunteer to work with the housing fund to manage the project. Okay? So then the housing fund would come in and say, all right, we'll loan X amount of dollars. We'll be in a second position behind the bank and in a position in front of the developer, so it's like a second mortgage basically. And by doing that, the bank that was making the loan saw that as equity coming in. You know, it was more money coming in behind the bank to support the project. And that was the basic fundamental idea of how the downtown housing fund worked. All right? That was the fundamental idea of how it worked. There's also a lot of incentives that the downtown housing fund had in place, which we'll go over on the slides in a few minutes. But that was what made it work. The other thing that made it work, and this was the toughest part. So the fund was started in 2000, and then I took over as chairman in 2001. And I was chairman for 15, 16 years. The toughest part of making it work is the bankers always looked at this as a loan that they were making at the bank. If there was a loan they were making at the bank, as a fund, the economics didn't work. You wouldn't make a loan. Okay? So we had to look at it as a loan that's benefiting the community. The other thing that we had to look at is that it's a loan. It is not a grant. We are going to be in here to preserve the principle of this so we can use it over and over and over again. This is not a grant. This is a loan. And so the developers all knew that they had to guarantee the loan. They were on hook for the loan. If anything went bad, we were going to act just like a bank and go after the developer and say, you owe us this money. Right? It's not a grant. But it is an art to get the bankers together to realize this is not the bank's money, this is the community's money. We've all put in $100,000 apiece. We have a fiduciary responsibility to protect the community's money, but we also have a fiduciary responsibility to take risk to develop our downtown. So we had several projects that the vote was 8-7. Okay? Long arguments, long fights, But as we got more projects under our belt and we saw more success, we knew what would work and what wouldn't work. The other thing that we learned is that smaller projects, you can get more funds out doing smaller projects. It doesn't tie up all your capital. We found the smaller projects were the ones that worked best. At first, projects with 4 units, 8 units, 12 units, 20 units. Eventually, we got up to doing 45 units and 100 units. But those projects were later on, except for one, which we're going to talk about in the presentation. Those projects were later on, and they needed less money from the Downtown Housing Fund because banks were willing to lend more on the project because of the success. All right? Housing is very important, getting people living downtown. Market rate housing, not subsidized housing, and don't do anything with HUD. In any of your market rate projects, don't do anything with HUD. They will take over the project, they'll demand so many units have to be non-market rate, and it just messes up the whole process. Don't do anything with HUD. That's a personal opinion. So I'm going to go in and talk a little bit about the downtown housing. All right. So I left the Downtown Housing Fund in 2000, I guess it was 17. And this is taking from our annual report from 2016, which I had a copy of. Okay, so at that time in 2016, DHA, Downtown Housing Assistance Fund, we were called, our legal name is DHA LLC. Okay? This is all private information. The general public doesn't even get to see this. It's got a lot of Louisville's money in it, but it's a private investment fund. That's how we operate. It's a private investment fund. By the way, we initially raised $4 million. We were so successful, we went back to the city and went back to donors and raised another $3 million. So our seed money was $7 million. I think it's worth now. I think the success and the revolving portion of the fund is probably worth about $8.5 million right now that we keep on putting back into projects. So Hancock Street, so DHA funded loans, okay, from the beginning through the end of 2015, you can see we did $9 million worth of loans, $9,086,000, okay? This is a revolving loan fund, because remember, we only had $7 million. We've had loans pay off, and then we take that money and reallocate it to another project. So $9,086,000, that allowed for $194 million in projects. That's how much we leveraged it. $194 million in projects. Remember, we had nobody living downtown. That alone was 656 units. It's not people, that's units. And most of those units had 2 people living in them. We found that in our downtown area, it was a lot of empty nesters moved to downtown. They wanted to have the urban lifestyle. And we had a lot of young people living downtown. No families. Very, very few families. The other challenge we had is for the young people, the price point was almost at the upper end of their price point. They really had to make a lifestyle decision if they wanted to be downtown. Because you could move out to the Highlands in Louisville to a house and rent the house, or you could move out to an apartment for a lot cheaper. So, but 656 units. Additional residential housing that was started, $54 million, 272 units, and DHA wasn't involved in any of those. And then also underway, these other buildings, let's see, which ones have been constructed? The Omni Hotel, Whiskey Row, Main and Clay, Ice House Lofts. The only ones that didn't get done are the Starks building. So there's another 529 units for $467 million of investment in the downtown area. So why is this successful? There's a couple different things here. I'm not going to read through all of this, but I'm going to talk about the low-cost financing part of this. But the reality is, it's shared risk. shared risk, and it's collaboration. That's what makes it work. Shared risk and collaboration. So to really entice developers to use this money, again, we're not interested in making money on this fund. We have no interest in making money. Right? Our number one interest is provide, protect capital, the fiduciary responsibility of our donors in the city, and it is to cover our costs. Okay? So, what we would do with this is we had very creative financing vehicles. And you got to remember when all this was going on too. This was back in the early 2000s. So interest rates were probably around 8%. Okay, so 6%, 8%. So a lot of loans that we did, there was the percentage that we loaned, the way we did it, it was very, very attractive to developers. So we had two pots of money. We had what was called the city money and the private money. Quite often, the city money, if we put city money into a project, we loaned it out to the developer at 0%. The city didn't want to return. Okay? Their return was going to be the taxes. For the private developer, for the private funds, we would loan the money out at 1% below the senior loan rate. So if Community Trust Bank was doing the project, and Community Trust Bank was loaning it out at 6%, our money came in at 5%. We also tied all of our terms and conditions for our loan exactly to the terms and conditions of the senior financer. So if there was a 125 coverage ratio, that's what we would have. We would also depend heavily on the senior financer. Since they were an investor in the fund, they would share with us all the due diligence items, the appraisals, the environmentals, etc. Since they were an investor in the fund, they would also do all the construction monitoring. And then they would send us the information for the draws on the construction monitoring. So the senior lender, because they were also an investor in the fund, they were a partner of ours. Because again, we're not making money. There's no reason to charge the developer extra things for due diligence when we're all sitting around the same table to share the risk, to share the information, to share the success. So we depended very heavily on all the bankers in that room. We also would charge an upfront fee, usually 1 or 2%, 1% for any loan lower than 5 years, 2% for any loan longer, up to 7 years. 5 to 7 years was a 2% upfront fee. Developers always said, why should I have to pay a fee? And we need the fee to cover our accounting costs and legal costs. So it's the cost of your money. You're getting a 1% below the senior lending rate, half your money is free, and you're blocking over a 1% fee, see you later. Right? So that conversation quickly ended. But the other thing is, again, it's a loan. Everybody guarantees it. Every single developer guarantees it. They're personally liable. This right here talks about some of the just internal mechanics of the loans themselves. Talks about the fees, talks about the rates, talks about how we would co-terminus with senior lenders. We also made it mandatory that if the developer got a loan and they were refinancing the loan, they had to take us out at the same time. So if they were refinancing the senior lender, they had to take us out, pay us back so that we could go ahead and take those funds and reinvest them in another project. I will also tell you, most of the developers in downtown Louisville that did these loans borrowed from us several times. So they became as much of a partner to us as we were to them to make these projects happen. So, public sector, what did this mean? So, all those projects that you saw before development, their tax value was $9,500,000. The taxes coming in on those projects was $113,000. Okay. At the end of 2015, those properties are now worth $165 million. And collectively, from 2001 to 2015, the taxes paid over that 15-year period was basically $9 million. The city of Louisville put up $3.5 million. 15 years later, they got $9 million back. This next slide is what I find really, really interesting. So you can see no taxes are paid early on. Look at 2015. Taxes in 2015 are about $2.2 million a year. Remember, they put in $3,500,000 in 2001. All right? Now, all those projects, the Hancock Street Firehouse is the first one. Waterfront Park Place is the third one. That's the green line. I want you to look at that green line. So the projects are in ascending order from top going down when they got started. Okay? But you look at them from the bottom up as when they were layered into the tax structure. Okay? All right. So that green bar, Waterfront Park Place, $60 million project. We put $2.5 billion into that project. It started, when did that start? 2001? 2002? Waterfront Park Place? All right. So we loaned the money. You can see the tax abatements. There's no taxes charged on that project. No taxes coming in. Let's get that whole building completely renovated in full. And then let's start taxing it. And then you can see the taxes when they started coming in was about 2006. All right? Building filled up more, 2007. After that, the rise of taxes is just the increase in its property tax rate. That's all it is. It's the increase in the value of the property. The property increased over time, and so did the taxes. So you can see by the tax abatement what it allowed the developer to do, to take the risk. It really helped the cash flows, and in the end, how much money you're generating off of that. Waterfront Park Place, yeah, it was 2001 is when we did our loan. So 2001 is when we did the loan. The original loan amount on the project was $2.5 billion. It was a big chunk of our funds. It was the landmark building to come to downtown Louisville to spur on Waterfront, to spur on all the development in Louisville. This gentleman right here did it. Okay? He did it all. We knew as a community that this project had to be done. And we knew in this community that if we didn't do it, we weren't going to get housing, because this was a luxury tower that was going to get people with lots of disposable income to move downtown. That vote was 8-7. I was not chairman, and I was the deciding vote. That vote was 8-7. $500,000 city funds, $2 million community funds, paid off in September 2006. We took all that money, put it right back in. This was the very first project that was done in 2000. Matured 11 years later. It actually got paid off in about 3 years. It was an old firehouse, 3 units. I think no one was willing to lend money on this project at all. I think the Downtown Housing Fund funded the whole thing, $45,000. It sold 3 years later. It sold about $150,000 3 years later. Excellent. This one, who knows what the spaghetti factory is in downtown Louisville? Okay. Spaghetti factory's on the first floor. The upper floors are gorgeous. They're some of the most beautiful lofts in all of downtown Louisville. This was originally the Levy building, which was a dry goods store. Yeah, dry goods store. And if you could ever see the unit on the third floor that's got the arched window, if you ever have the opportunity to go to that, it is spectacular. Absolutely spectacular. A group of private individuals, lease-found partners. You can see we did the loan in July. They paid us off in November. We did $200,000. 20 units. They built it, at least up in 90 days. Refinanced the whole thing, paid us off. All right? So those are just 3 examples. I wanted to show you those 3 examples because one was a landmark key project that Jim did. It was the project that really set the stage to drive the other projects in downtown Louisville. Hancock Street Firehouse was the first one we did. Nobody would do it. And we did it real small. And then this one was tremendous commercial success. And then we had all kinds of other projects over the time. We continued on during the big financial crisis of 2008. There were several projects that got into trouble. We decided at that time to use the fund to support downtown housing. We had some out-of-town banks say to some of our developers, you need to get out, or you need to do a pay down, and we came in as a lender to help those developers because the projects were great, the developers were good, and they were just caught in a bad situation. So we judiciously used the fund to help. The other thing is, as the fund and as the chairman, I had many difficult conversations with our mayor. Where's our mayor here? Difficult conversations with our mayor, where the mayor or the administration would want to do projects, and I said, we're not going to do them because it's financially not good. We're not going to take the risk, we're not going to do it. Or the administration would want to go outside the original boundaries of the downtown housing district and the central business district. We also said that's not going to happen. We're not going to go there. We're not going to dilute our assets to get outside of the central business district. We're going to stay where we are. We did make an exception. We did do a lot of projects in the New Loop area, which is adjacent to the downtown area, because we saw that is where the greatest housing stock was, and that was going to be a great feeder to the downtown area. So we did make that exception, but there's a lot of times as the housing fund chairman, you have to say no to your mayor, which is not fun, since they're your biggest investor, 50%. But the housing fund has the same vote. That's the other thing. Every man, every woman, whoever puts up money, it's whether you put up $50,000 or $3.5 million, if you're a participant in the fund, it's one vote. It's not a weighted vote. It's one vote. Okay. That's a downtown housing fund. You all have some questions on that?
You set that up as an LLC?
Yes.
That was recommended.
So the world has changed a lot since the year 2000 when we set this up. When we set this up, we set it up under the auspices, the idea that this was going to be an investment fund. And so it was going to be an investment loan fund. So the corporate contributors that contributed would receive a dividend. They would receive a K-1 every year, indicating their holdings in the fund and how much money they made out of it. What we quickly learned as corporate America changed and as the leadership landscape changed, companies like Brown-Forman left Louisville, they just wanted it to be a donation. They didn't want to have to mess with a $100,000 investment in the fund. Okay? So when you, at first, set it up as an LLC and as an investment fund made some sense. But today, if you could set it up as a nonprofit, that's what I would do. I would just ask for people to make a contribution. Okay? Yes?
But the private money and city money have to be held separately and administered separately?
No, but we account for them separately.
Just accounted separately?
Just accounting for them separately. So in the city of Louisville also, they made a grant, a callable grant, because everybody else had an investment that we could refund back to, if we ever liquidated, all that money would go back to those investors. The city of Louisville had a callable grant, and that callable grant, they had the right to call it in 30 days, even if it was invested in all these properties. So when we had a change in administration, I had another conversation with the new mayor about how you can't call your money. And with that, this fund is housed with the development office. It's called Louisville Forward, part of the mayor's office, and it's part of Louisville Forward's budget and they don't make any money, and the mayor never sees it, and the city council never sees it. Because, as you know, when cities see that they have money, and there might be a pot of money over here that they can grab hold of, they grab it, and your initiative that you had that's meant so much goes away. So Louisville Forward, they manage it, they look at it, they have a person on the loan committee, but they have no other voice. Their voice is not any larger than the rest of ours. Now, where the city, the Downtown Development Corporation, and Louisville Forward come into play is a lot of times your developers will go to them first. They'll go to them first, they'll then go show those developers the housing stock that's available, the property that's available, and then they'll usually call us in, they'll call in the head of the Downtown Housing Fund and say, we've got a developer we'd like you to meet. If it makes sense, we would like to use Downtown Housing Fund's dollars as part of an incentive to make this work. Okay. We work very closely as a partner with Louisville Forward, very closely as a partner with the economic development people. We want to layer in the money if it makes sense, but if it does not make financial sense, we're not going to do it. The other thing is we typically loan money to seasoned developers. The person off the street, this was their first development and they thought they could do it, we're not going to do it. All right? We're just like an evil, mean bank. We're looking for people that have experience to ensure that the project is successful. Other questions? Yeah.
I haven't touched on it, but my question was, who is involved in the development corporation and how that interacts with your capital fund?
So, all right. The Downtown Development Corporation is, and it's now called the Downtown Partnership. It is comprised of two different organizations. It's comprised of the Downtown Development Corporation, which is a 501c3 organization, and the members of that organization are appointed by the mayor. Okay? And they all have some type of nexus to downtown Louisville. They're either tenants in downtown Louisville, their businesses there. I think the mayor also appoints some people from Jefferson County that are outside the nexus that are big supporters of downtown. The other part of the downtown partnership is a group called the Louisville Downtown Management District. Are you all familiar with the Business Improvement District? I see some yeses, I see some. Okay. The Business Improvement District. It's got to be passed by the state legislature to allow you to have it. I highly recommend it. It has been a tremendous tool for our downtown. Remember, we don't have the ability to do a 1-cent sales tax for improvements, do we? What we do have the ability to do is to have all the landowners down here, it's got to be the property owners, that are business owners, say, we want to form a business improvement district to collectively improve our downtown. And in doing so, we're going to charge ourselves an assessment. And that assessment is basically a tax. It's basically a corporate homeowners association. It's the best way to describe it. It's a corporate homeowners association. But you've got to have, I think it's 80% of all the property owners sign up to say that they want to have this happen. Then you've got to have your city take it to the state legislature. The legislature's got to approve it. And then, since all the property owners aren't voters of their property, okay, because you might live someplace else, so that's your residence and that's where you vote, the property owners, they don't have representation for taxation. So your city government, your elected officials, then become the fiduciaries for the taxation. And so the Business Improvement District, when they pass the assessment or the tax, whatever it's going to be, they have to present the budget. This is what the tax is going to be. Here's how we're going to spend the money, and then the city approves it. Because you have to have elected officials represent those landowners for the taxation. And if you want more information on that, I'm sure we can get it to you somehow. I can get you the legislation from our Louisville Downtown Management District.
Basically, I mean, it is a sort of maintenance, upkeep, and safety. They have teams of people that go around, and so there's not a cigarette butt or whatever on the sidewalk any place in downtown where everything's clean and all that. But they also have safety teams
Right.
around it, kind of have a presence.
Yeah. So I would suggest that you all look very heavily at the Business Improvement District, and we can get you in touch with the folks that run it. The Business Improvement District does all the beautification downtown. They do all the street cleaning, not the garbage collection, but the street cleaning. And not the street cleaning where you have the big street cleaners come out. They're the ones getting the cigarette butts off the street. They're the ones sweeping the sidewalks. They're the ones with the gum busters cleaning the gum off the street. When the storm comes through and the branches come off the trees, they're the ones picking it up. They have safety officers. These safety officers, we call them ambassadors. They wear yellow shirts, and they're always out on the streets. They help visitors. If you want to be walked to your car, they walk into the car. They know all the homeless people. They work very closely with the homeless people. The safety officers work with the homeless shelters and the police department, and they help get the homeless people off the streets and the care that they need. Okay? They do a lot of the artwork that we have downtown. If you see any statues, stainless steel statues, ornamental bike rack, that's all done by the Business Improvement District. If you go downtown and you see the garbage cans, the metal garbage cans that say Louisville on them, that's all done by the Downtown Improvement District. The fancy street signs, aren't just the green ones that might be blue or have fleur-de-lis or something on them, that's all the Downtown Development District. The flower pots you see out on the street, they're not done by private property, they're done by the Downtown Development District. Downtown Development District is made up of, it's made up by statute, by certain amounts of people that live in the downtown area. There's got to be so many residential people, so many commercial property, so many tenants, so many landowners, and it's all dictated by the legislation, and then those people are also appointed by the mayor. So the Louisville Downtown Management District came together, the Louisville Downtown Development Corporation came together about 5 or 6 years ago, and they formed a partnership. And so really it's a downtown partnership that's really doing most of everything in downtown. So does that answer your question? Long answer. All right. So the Louisville Downtown Management District is funded by a tax assessment, okay, that they pass upon themselves. And I think it's 7.5 cents per thousand, okay. And then I think the Downtown Partnership is funded by a lease with the baseball stadium. So the baseball stadium has a lease for that land. The City of Louisville has, by contract, given that to the Downtown Development Corporation. Every time that lease renews, Metro Council wants to take that money. So that's another issue you need to be careful of. Okay. Does that help? All right, what other questions do we have on housing or forming different types of tools? Next item then is about 10 years ago, we formed the Downtown Commercial Fund. So how are we on time? Okay. So the Downtown Commercial Fund was formed to make loans to businesses. What we found is a lot of the developers were doing mixed-use properties. Mixed use being the first floor, commercial space like this, second and third floors, fourth floors, all lofts, apartments, condos. And they were having trouble getting incentives put in place to get businesses to move in. The Downtown Commercial Loan Fund is a lot harder to do because when you do a real estate fund, you can take a second loan on the real estate. When you're doing a commercial loan fund, you usually have to take a secondary position on accounts receivable, inventory, things of that nature. The Downtown Commercial Loan Fund has been a little bit harder to get off the ground because it's just harder to do. Just harder to do. But it's another incentive that's been put in place. One of the big success stories with the Downtown Commercial Loan Fund, how many of you all have ever heard of Rabbit Hole Bourbon? Okay, Rabbit Hole Bourbon was a bourbon company started, about 6 or 8 years ago. It's in downtown Louisville. Stockyards Bank did the first loan on it. Commercial Loan Fund came in, did a secondary commercial loan to help fund the inventory of the bourbon. There was value in the bourbon, so They took a risk, they loaned money above what the bank would loan on the margin of the bourbon. And Rabbit Hole, 5 or 6 years later, sells for multi-millions of dollars. It's a big success. Okay? So there are things you can do with the commercial loan fund. You can find ways to do it. It's just harder. It's also another tool that you ought to think about. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
And you would not mix the two?
No, do not mix the
Versus
two.
real estate. That's-
Do not mix the two. Do not mix the two at all. As a matter of fact, I think there's even separate lenders that are on the two to really have, so that you don't have conflict of interest. So, and I know the chairman of the housing fund and the chairman of the loan fund, they'll talk to each other saying, you put money into this project, yes, here's all the issues we see, and vice versa. So you may have a project like this where the housing fund will loan money for the units upstairs, but they're not loaning any money for this space. The commercial loan fund may do that. Okay? But it's a separate decision.
For example, like a restaurant, which, part of our interest is to try to create some development in that area. Is it possible for that person to make all the kitchen equipment and things like that?
Sure, they can do that. There's all kinds of ways that you can structure it, but it also depends if there's a senior lender. Well, the senior lender have already done that. What other questions do you have? Kind of downloaded a bunch of information on different types of incentives that you might be able to look at, examine, that might work for your community. I can go back to one thing again. It's got to be collaborative. Everybody's got to move in the same direction. No, no, no will be what you hear all the time. I don't want change. There's no reason to do this. I love Danville just the way it is. Yes.
I'm processing.
Yeah.
So if the city were to use property as its city, they run that through the partnership?
All right, so that's an interesting question. I didn't even touch upon the acquiring of property. So this is a very tricky subject, okay? So when the Downtown Development Corporation was first formed, one of the things it did was buy property. And it would buy property under separate corporate names. The property would be, a shell entity would be set up. That shell entity would then buy the property, and it would be held within the assets of the Downtown Development Corporation. You don't want the public to know that property is being acquired. I know we're on camera, sorry public, but what happens is when everybody knows that property is being acquired, that $100,000 piece of property suddenly becomes $250,000. The taxpayers lose. The citizens lose. So you set up a separate corporation, and almost, you may allocate money, you may say, we're going to put X amount of dollars here into the Downtown Development Corporation. Your job is to go buy property. I'll have somebody in the administration watch over what you're doing, but the city council can't even know. No one can know. You're going to have to figure out what's the right check and balance to have in place to make sure the money's being spent honestly to collect the property. But people can't know. People cannot know what's being purchased because everything goes up in value. Artificially goes up in value, and the community loses. And a lot of times, the Downtown Development Corporation, they would buy that property, they would either sell it at cost to some of these developers, or they would just donate it to the developer because it's the only way the project works. So you also got to realize that it's going to be a sunk cost. Does that make sense? It's hard to do.
And the people within the park, the development park, are appointed by the mayor.
They are. Okay. They're appointed by the mayor, but ratified by the Metro Council. So there's a check and balance, right? They're appointed by the mayor, but they have to be ratified. So the Metro Council, we all have to be careful that we appoint the right people and have the right representation, because you don't get overloaded with not the right people. Any other questions? All right, yeah.
Hey, in the fund itself, the one that does the lending the development, not the business fund. What is the mix on, I know you said the bankers are on there, and they're sort of the aggressive lenders, which is funny something like that. How many developers do you have developers in there? I mean, I know that.
No developers. You've got to contribute to the fund, and then there's no developers, or if you are a developer, you can't borrow money from the fund.
Right, sure,
All
okay.
right? So, but we haven't had any developers contribute on the front end. That's an interesting question. You might have a developer say, I believe in this project, and I want to put in a bunch of money. You're going to have to figure out how you want to administer that. Do you want to have that developer as part of the loan fund? The other problem that you have when you do that, as a developer, people are going to see other developers' financial statements. So you've got the fiduciary responsibility and the privacy issues you have to deal with, confidentiality issues. So typically, it's just been bankers. A lot of the corporations didn't even want to see what people had.
Oh, sure.
Just for the bankers. Any other questions? All right, I'll just leave you with these words. Again, it's got to be collaborative. You got to have a vision. You got to move together. No will be more common than yes. It's hard to get to yes, but you can get there. And as I said in my editorial to the citizens of Louisville, you're going to make great things happen. Will it be you? Thank you.
Louis, thank you very much. Very, very helpful and informative, and we appreciate your coming as your own expense to be with us. There's a local distillery that's doing quite well and developing quickly. It's called the Wilderness Trail, and we have something here for you to thank you for making the trip and sharing your information. So thank you. I wouldn't drink it all at once. So
That's great. Thank you. I appreciate
you're
it.
very welcome. Thank you, sir. Chris, could you tell us now where to go or what to do? And we'll, if we could take this about 10 minutes or so to let you walk around and look at what has been done here at these properties, and then come back to the same place. We'll have lunch here.
Yeah, absolutely. No obligation, but we have opened up, come out Main Street here, the door to get to the second story. It's been a fully renovated, higher-end living space downtown. So you're more than welcome to walk up, peruse. Also, I will open the door. Next door is a construction zone, so enter at your own risk. Be careful as you hear, but at least you'll start to get the concept of, again, what we have been working through multiple groups to try to inspire downtown. And quite frankly, we count on this master plan to be the next level of inspiration. So that's our hope and goal. So thank you.
We need to adjourn before we start going around.
Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Motion made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign, to adjourn.